Welcome to another Elixir event, and today we're going to be talking to Viridian Nutrition. And from Viridian Nutrition, we have the lovely Jenny Carson, who is a Master of Research in Public Health. She has a degree in nutrition. She's an active member of the British Association of Nutrition and Lifestyle Medicine, as well as being the senior nutritionist at Viridian Nutrition. And with these great credentials, she's going to be talking about one of the biggest topics that we have in store around pain and inflammation. So if you're one of these people that are finding themselves taking lots of pharmaceutical drugs, whether that's ibuprofen or paracetamol, and you're feeling that you are looking for an alternative, or you're just in pain and you're trying to find a way of managing it in a better, smarter way, then Jenny and this talk will be of real benefit to you. So if that is you, or if it's somebody that you know, then please share this video with them. And I am sure they will find it very informative. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the wonderful Jenny. So over to you, Jenny. Let us know a little bit about you.
Okay, thank you. Well, as you rightly said, I'm the senior nutritionist at Viridian Nutrition. Viridian Nutrition is a food supplement company with an ethical twist on things, and certainly has an organic heart. So the food supplements are built on 3 pillars. It's purity, ethics, and charity. So in terms of purity, each nutrient, each food supplement is 100% nutrition. We don't use any additives or fillers, binders, excipients whatsoever. In terms of ethics, there's a lot of support for planetary health and the environmental health. So for example, all of our packaging is either recyclable or compostable. And then finally, charity. Every purchase of a Viridian Nutrition food supplement has a charitable contribution. And annually, all the retailers will vote for where those charitable contributions are distributed. So it's a fantastic place, great team to work with. And so my sort
and we love you guys as well, by the way.
I'm sorry?
You guys, it's great. We absolutely love Viridian. It's a fantastic company to work with as well. And yeah, our brands are very much aligned.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's lovely. That's great. In terms of my journey into nutrition, I was a mature student when I went back to university. At the time, I was working on a fixed term contract for the recession in 2009. And at the time, I was doing a lot of triathlon. And I was sort of mid-30s, I would say, and I was noticing a big distinction between good nutrition and good performance, and also poor nutrition and poor performance. So I started reading a lot more around it, around the subject, and got quite into it. At a similar time, my position as a fixed term employee came to an end. And so that was the perfect opportunity to go off to university. So I went living in a camper van and became a university student. So I did a Bachelor of Science with honours in nutritional science.
I never thought of that when I went to uni. That's a really clever way of doing it.
So I was just 40 when I graduated, and I did have a brief foray with the NHS that was based in Nottingham at both hospitals there, so both City and Queen's, but not for long. And Cheryl got in touch with me, Cheryl Fallon, the founder of Viridian Nutrition, and invited me down to Northampton to see the setup and meet the team. And yeah, needless to say, I left the NHS and started working with Viridian. So I started as a nutritional advisor, became nutritional supervisor, and now manager. And then last year, I did a Master of Research in Public Health, and yeah, graduated from that last year. So that brings me to the present day.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's get onto the subject, if you don't mind diving straight in. Sorry, what is pain and inflammation, first of all, in its various different types?
Yeah, sure. So pain and inflammation is our first immune response to injury, illness, or infection. Now, we can actually think of all health conditions, all infections as an abundance of tiny injuries, because essentially that's what it's doing. Irrelevant of the source, whether it's a viral infection, a bacterial infection, or a non-communicable disease, they all cause lots of tiny injuries to the body. So the first response is to draw fluid and heat and inflammation to the site of injury, and that is an antibacterial strategy. So straight away the body is bringing in its own cleansing strategy to stop further infection of the injured site. We start to feel pain, and it's perceived that that is to stop us from adding to that injury. So we're feeling pain, for example, in the knee, we're not going to go out running and possibly progress the injury even further. It's encouraging us to rest the injured site. So it's really interesting. And in fact, pain and inflammation is a good thing, because once the body starts signaling for inflammation, what we find is that that kickstarts a process called phagocytosis, which essentially is the cleansing of the area of debris, infected cells, and dead cells. And once that occurs, that triggers healing. Now, in normal circumstances, once that procedure, that cycle has occurred, inflammation and pain will start to reduce. But the problem is if that inflammation and pain becomes uncontrolled and prolonged.
So is that when we get in a chronic inflammation?
A chronic state, yeah, absolutely. So acute is short term, that's when the pain and inflammation resolves very quickly. But then obviously chronic is the long term, and that's when the inflammation is just not pacifying whatsoever, and it's continuing. It's almost in a cycle, a mediation, a continuation, and that's when it can be a bit of an issue. So if you consider, say, somebody who's under long-term stress, that's a psychological stress, but that's actually really inflammatory, because especially if the stressor is continuous, that is causing oxidative damage and inflammation within the body throughout the period of that stressful event. And if that's a daily stress that's continuing, then so is the inflammation that's associated with it.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so how would we know if the pain and inflammation was uncontrolled, though? Okay,
so uncontrolled inflammation is, this is a really interesting question, actually, because it's actually really difficult. It's not that, we can't always see pain, we can feel it, but we can't always see inflammation. So, for example, if you think of atherosclerosis, so the buildup of arterial plaque, there's a lot of pain and inflammation involved in that process, but generally we can't feel it or see it because it's within our blood vessels. So an indicator there would be taking blood pressure checks on a regular basis. So as plaque builds up in the blood vessels, what happens is the area that the blood passes through is reduced, so blood pressure is increased. So it's thinking about these specific potential health conditions that an individual may have, and what effect it has on the body as to how you then deduce whether pain and inflammation is involved. So if we think about, say, an injury to a joint or degraded cartilage in a joint, what would be the indicator? Well, there might be the feelings of pain. There may be visual swelling in the joint. But also, you're going to notice that the range of motion is not going to be what it had been previously. Also, there could be stiffness in the joint. So they're the other indicators. So it's sometimes sort of thinking a little bit outside the box. I mean, one of the hypotheses behind lowered mood and depression is that it's down to inflammation in the brain. And that kind of makes sense, because it is considered that inflammation is neurotoxic, meaning that it damages the brain cells. So what would the body do? Well, the body is under possibly a self-preservation strategy where it's encouraging the individual to not do anything else that can injure them, to sleep, And that's when we start to regenerate and heal from, you know, this inflammation that's occurred possibly in the brain.
Okay, so if I've got something like arthritis, for instance, and I can't move my arm, or, you know, is it advisable to keep moving that arm, or is it better to rest it and sleep? And
yeah, so I mean, sleep is a time when you do recovery, although obviously recovery is also going to be supported by nutrition. So in terms of lifestyle interventions, definitely ensuring good sleep, good hydration and good nutrition is paramount. Now, in terms of, is it better to continue exercising that area? It is something that is controversial. And I think at that point, that would be a refer to, you know, GP or physiotherapist as to what would be the best actions to take. But in terms of, you know, nutrition, you know, we can go on to talk about what could be an anti-inflammatory diet and what nutrients are considered to be useful when there's inflammation. And that may be appropriate for someone who is managing arthritis or osteoarthritis.
yeah, okay, so let's go into that then. So are there any lifestyle factors that do contribute to prolonged pain?
Prolonged pain and inflammation,
Yeah.
yeah, there is. I mean, for example, excessive alcohol intake is very inflammatory. So the current government recommendations are a maximum of 14 units on a weekly basis, and once you go above that, it's considered to be excessive. Now, the reason being, alcohol in its pure state is not massively toxic, but for the body to detoxify the alcohol from the body, it has to turn it into another form, which is called aldehydes, and they're extremely toxic. And that's where you get the issues with liver damage, because what they do is they generate a lot of oxidative damage. Oxidative damage is the generation of very aggressive molecules called free radicals. Essentially, their molecular structure is incomplete. They're missing an electron. And what makes them so aggressive is that they're constantly searching for an electron elsewhere to quell them. So they will break off tissue and damage cells looking for that electron. So if you think about detoxifying aldehydes, which were previously alcohol, that may occur within the liver. So that's the link there with potential damage to the cells within the liver in relation to excessive alcohol. Well, that whole process is very inflammatory. And then there's things like pollutants.
So really, somebody's saying, sorry to cut across you, but
oh, sorry.
Somebody's saying if they're, you know, to quell their pain is to have a drink of alcohol, it's probably not the most advisable thing, is it?
I mean, I think if they're staying within a recommended amount, you know, there can be benefits from that, especially if that's something that they associate with feeling better. Mm-hmm. But overall, I would, you know, say I was talking with a nutrition client, I would be trying to instigate some behavior change away from using the alcohol to quell pain, and maybe looking at dietary interventions that would help quell the pain, you know, looking at adding certain herbs and spices, looking at where are they getting their fatty acids, where they're getting their fats from, essentially, and things like that. Are they eating processed foods, or are they eating whole foods, and things like that. So I know what you're saying in terms of, oh, you know, I just have a couple of glasses of wine because it helps with whatever. And I think that's fine if you're staying under the 14 units, but just be aware that there are other things that you can do in, you know, with what you consume that potentially could also be very, very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are there any others that can contribute? I can't speak
to prolonged inflammation? Absolutely. Yeah. So airborne toxins, smoking, things like that, they're very progressive of oxidative damage. And then in addition, things like a sedentary lifestyle where, you know, the cardiovascular system is not being exercised, and, you know, things like that, just adding in a small walk each day can be very beneficial. And then looking at specifically at diet, if the diet is high in sugar and high in processed foods, then generally those are considered to be quite inflammatory. And the reason being is that sugar potentially can be inflammatory, and that's based around how the body responds to it in blood glucose management. So if you eat a very sugary meal, there's a sudden dump of all this glucose into the blood circulation. So blood glucose shoots up, so the body pumps out a ton of insulin to take the blood glucose out of circulation, which then causes a steep drop in blood glucose. And then if that drops too much, the body starts pumping out cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and adrenaline to liberate the body's stores to then lift the blood glucose back up. So that whole process is quite draining in terms of energy, but also quite inflammatory. And then in terms of processed foods, often they're abundant in salts, which can be very dehydrating and can also affect blood pressure, but also they're rich in what we know as, what we term as omega-6 essential fatty acids. Now, the term essential means that we have to eat them, that we can't make them in our body. However, when a diet is only providing or is dominant in omega-6, what that does is we use those essential fatty acids to make our cells, and specifically the cell membrane. So when the only available fatty acids when we're making new cells are omega-6s, it means that the cell becomes very rigid and structural. And in terms of allowing nutrients in, it's quite hard. And also allowing waste out, that's quite hard. So the buildup of toxins within the cell is very promotive of oxidative damage and inflammatory. Whereas
omega-6 is something we get a lot of in our diet, isn't it? I mean, it's from margarines to butter to processed meats to, well, everything. There's loads of things that it's in.
That's right, that's right. I mean, you do get small amounts in what we term healthy foods as well, but it's more balanced. There's a better balance of the omega-6 to the omega-3s, because that's generally what we're talking about, is an omega-6 to omega-3 balance. But you're completely right, processed foods, margarines, pressed meats, things like that are very, very rich in omega-3s, in omega-6s, sorry, omega-6. And that's because omega-6s are used throughout food industry in producing these processed foods, you know, for general market. Yeah.
So mixing that with a sedentary lifestyle, stress, or any other underlying health condition, we're destined to be in pain, aren't we, or suffer some kind of inflammation in the body. At some point, it has to manifest itself somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so what can be done about this? What can we do nutritionally to help with inflammation?
Okay, so the first thing I always encourage people to do is start looking at what they're currently eating and how that can be replaced by whole foods. So by a whole foods diet, what I mean is food in its own entirety. So for example, you look at a ready meal, and when you look on the ingredients list, there's 20, 30 different ingredients, but you pick up an apple or broccoli, pumpkin, orange, etc. They're just single ingredients. So looking for single ingredient foods. So in terms of fruits and veg, legumes, potatoes, whole grains, that's fairly easy. But when it comes to your proteins, I would say be looking at things like the organic tofus, the organic soybean products. And then obviously, you know, in terms of animal-based products, you would be looking for oily fish from the fish counter, or even animal products in their original state. So that's the first thing, and that can be super, super helpful, because straight away you've moved away from low nutrient foods to high nutrient foods. And just that simple step can make a massive, massive change. And if you layer on top of that omega-3 rich foods, so they're things like oily fish, marine algae, flax, walnuts, you know, you're getting that anti-inflammatory component. Now, what makes marine algae and oily fish so special is that the omega-3s that are provided by those foods are in the form of EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. And it's in those forms that we know omega-3s directly impact and interrupt the inflammatory cascade. So it's starting to dampen down inflammation. Now, that's not to say that things like flax and walnuts aren't good for you. They are. They provide lots of really good nutrients. And the omega-3s are as ALA, which is alpha-linolenic acid. What that means is the body has to then transform them through a pathway that tends to be very, very slow. And in some individuals, it can be quite a difficult pathway. But ultimately, they would then become EPA, DHA. But it just means it's not as instant. They're not there already present in the food. So those two steps, the whole foods diet and adding the omega-3s, is essential. And you can really power that up by adding in your herbs and spices. And this is a really simple way of really adding a big, powerful punch of nutrition. And especially if you're thinking of things like turmeric and ginger, they're known and they've been shown in research to exert potent anti-inflammatory effect.
Fantastic. Just on the omega-3s, so some of our customers that will be listening to this at the moment are vegan, and how will they be able to get omega-3s in their diet when they can't take a fish oil, for instance?
Yeah, when they can't take a fish oil, of course. That's where the marine algae comes into play.
Right.
So you'll probably see that there's, or you probably stock them, they're vegan marine algae that provide EPA and DHA. Okay. So in that form, you're getting it exactly as the form that interrupts inflammation. But then also the vegan diet has things like flax that are widely available, walnuts, spirulina, chlorella. They're all really good sources of omega-3s.
Fantastic. And you said about herbs there. Now, herbs and spices are one of my favorite topics when it comes to pain and inflammation. And I've had personal experience of this. So I do a lot of running, I do a lot of swimming, and I suffer from dodgy knees and pulled muscles and all kinds of weird things. But the benefits of herbs and spices to me, I've experienced. And, you know, are there any specific, you know, standout, I've got an idea of a few myself, but some standout herbs and spices that you would say, yeah, these are the ones that are really going to help you?
Yeah, I mean, in culinary terms, I would say turmeric and ginger, adding those to your cooking will be, you know, extremely helpful. But then if you're looking more at food supplements, again, turmeric, but possibly as curcumin, but with full spectrum turmeric. So curcumin is the main bioactive that's present in turmeric. It's what's responsible for that bright orange colour. You've got things like boswellia, which is the resin from the frankincense tree. That is a potent anti-inflammatory. Or bromelain, which is taken from the stem of pineapples. Bromelain is a potent anti-inflammatory. So straight away, you've got a few, you know, some great choices. In addition to that, and probably a little bit more off the beaten track, shall we say, are things like pine bark extracts.
Right.
They can be extremely anti-inflammatory. So definitely when you're looking at food supplements, you can look at those types of botanicals. But then again, there are more compounds as well that can be anti-inflammatory, such as glucosamine sulfate. So that can be really, really useful. So not only does it help to delay the breakdown or the conversion of cartilage into bone, it has been shown in research that glucosamine sulfate also has an anti-inflammatory effect.
So just for our listeners, glucosamine sulfate comes from shells, is that right?
It comes from what, sorry?
From shells.
That's a non-vegan form. There are vegan glucosamine sulfates out there, which I kind of have a preference for, and they're from the fermentation of non-GMO corn.
Of corn, sorry, did you say?
Yeah, fermented corn. So the fermentation of non-GMO corn.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, so that's a great vegan option. Very well tolerated. Molecularly identical, so you know, it's glucosamine sulfate, so it's applicable. All the research out there on glucosamine sulfate are completely applicable to any food supplements that contain that form of glucosamine.
And I think what I'm starting to think as well is that as you start to eat these foods and you start to try these herbs and spices, inflammation starts to reduce in the body. So those pain points or pinch points or whatever you want to call them that are there are drastically getting reduced day by day by this process. So the need to take those paracetamols becomes less and less important.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it depends where the individual is starting from, but you're completely right. When you're changing your diet and adding in spices such as turmeric and curcumin and ginger, then the progress you make is very incremental on each day, but over a period of months, that's going to build up.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so how about fermented foods as well, or something like that? Like we get a lot of sauerkraut and kimchi and things like that, which are great for gut health, but how does that necessarily help in terms of inflammation?
So fermented foods such as those that you've just recommended, and also things like beneficial bacteria. So what happens is when they're presented in the gastrointestinal tract, they sit in the large intestine, and at that point they ferment in undigestible fibers. That's their sort of fuel, shall we say. That's what they like to ferment. And from that, they will make immune factors. And also it has been shown in research that they produce anti-inflammatory factors and are involved in dampening down the signaling for inflammation. So just by, like you say, introducing sauerkraut a few times a week, or adding kimchi to some of your meals, that too could have an anti-inflammatory effect.
Fantastic. So one of the things that I do as well is that because I'm always running around or doing something, as I'm getting older, I am finding that if I stop moving, everything seizes up. So one, what is driving that? And two, how do I stop it? You know, I am pretty active anyway, but how can I try and prevent, the stiffness coming in?
Okay. So this is generally what, after a long drive somewhere, when you've had to
absolutely drive is a really good example. Get out the car and then walk around the car park for half an hour trying to hold my back in place.
Oh no. Okay, so I mean, straight away I'd be saying consider getting the omega-3 rich foods into your diet, so either oily fish or the marine algae, and I would say one of those would be your top priority. So and what you're doing there is straight away you're getting the essential fatty acids that interact with the inflammatory cascade. Now, in addition to that, it can be really good to ensure that your hydration with electrolytes, because if we think about joints, the joint has what's called a synovial compartment, and within that joint you've got synovial fluid, and that's what keeps the joint mobile. So compounds such as MSM, methyl sulfonyl methane, are very promotive of the fluids that are inside these joint compartments. So addressing hydration with electrolytes, so electrolyte minerals are calcium, sodium, magnesium, chloride and potassium, and you take them in just quite small amounts, add them to your water. So a combination of the water with minerals, with electrolyte minerals, and the MSM potentially may actually help relieve that sort of stiffness by promoting the fluid within the joint.
Okay, fantastic, thank you. I will take that one on board without a doubt.
Let me know how you get on.
Okay, right. So just to summarize then, so I always ask this of everybody who comes on to talk with us, but what are your top tips for health, especially around managing pain and inflammation?
Yeah, sure. So I have 3 top tips. So the first one is, I can't stress enough what a whole foods diet, what benefits can be had from having the whole foods diet. So just to recap, it's food in its original state. On top of that, really look at getting more herbs and spices in your culinary practices. So for example, if you're looking specifically at inflammation, then the turmerics and the gingers are amazing spices to go with, but also adding things like the herbs such as parsley, coriander and oregano. They're just so nutrient dense that the more nutrition you have available, then that's liberating more nutrients that can help quell inflammation and fight oxidative damage. And then finally, make it easy. So we've talked about all these different strategies, and sometimes that can seem really overwhelming. So it's making it easy for yourself. If you come home from work and all you've got in the cupboards is a few chocolate bars and some crackers, then that's what you're going to eat. Whereas if you've got a fridge or a freezer that's full of prepared meals that maybe you did last weekend, then all you've got to do is defrost and warm them up, then that makes it so much easier to stay on track and implement these behaviour changes and these tweaks to the diet that are supportive of an anti-inflammatory lifestyle.
Keep watching our Elixir Health recipes.
Yeah,
lots
definitely.
of these on there. Yeah, no, it's a really good shout. And I think making it easy is the most important thing. And we find that when we're advising people to deal with their pain, even though they're suffering quite a lot with pain, it's really difficult to make that transformation from, you know, this is what I eat today to this is what I actually need to eat. There needs to be a few stages within that process before we get to achieving that goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also
even just change something, I guess, is better than nothing at all, isn't it?
Definitely. Like your first goal might be to get 3 servings of, or 3 or 4 marine algae servings each weekend. That might be all that you do. Then the following week you might say, okay, with every meal I'm going to get 3 different coloured vegetables, and that's something that you work on for a week or 2. Then the week after that you might start measuring the amount of water that you're drinking to ensure that you're getting maybe 2 or 3 litres a day and things like that. So yeah, you're completely right. Building up habits is just the repetition of one little element and slowly adding to it. And just making it easy on yourself. And also, you know, we're not striving for perfection. We're striving to hit our goals 80% of the time, because if we've got that remaining 20% to play with, where we can do, you know, different things, we maybe eat a little bit off plan, then it makes the sticking to the anti-inflammatory diet so much easier.
I always say as well, I think one of the most dangerous words in the English language is moderation, because nobody knows what that means. So
no.
you say, oh, like one of the things that you said to it was alcohol. So you say, oh, you know, if you drink alcohol, I think, oh, I only drink in moderation. But their idea of moderation might be every night.
Yeah, you've got to sort of quantify it, haven't you? So
You've got to
like with the alcohol, it's the 16 unit cut off, a 14 unit, sorry, cut off. But yeah, I mean, you know, if you're thinking about your calorific intake and where your calories are coming from, if, for example, if your intake, I mean, you're highly active, so you're probably going to be 3,000 calories a day. If 80% of those calories are coming from anti-inflammatory sources, your whole foods, your oily fish, your marine algae, your nuts and seeds, and so on, then you've got that little wiggle room for just that 20% that may help you just stay on track. And, you know, if we're constantly aiming for perfection, it's easy to berate ourselves when we don't achieve it. So go for that 80%, and you can hit 80% day after day after day, because you know you've got that 20% wiggle room if you need it.
I really like that. That's a great way of looking at it. So if you concentrate on the 80% and make sure that your diet and your nutrition is built up in that way, and that includes exercise as well, and then you've got 20% bit of freedom. But if you're not doing the 80%, you haven't got the 20%. You're just eating away at your 80%. That's a really good way of looking at it. And, you know, it's those little psychological shifts that can make the difference, isn't it?
It is. That was a rule I often applied in sort of training for triathlon, for example. You know, I had to hit my you know, projected training 80% of the time, but then 20% I could do whatever the hell I wanted to. So I could go out and do my favorite bike ride or do my favorite run or whatever, and it didn't matter what my, you know, minute per mile I was doing or whatever. So you can apply it to, you know, everything. It's a nice one.
It is a really good one. So, well, fantastic tips, really good talk. I really enjoyed it, and thanks for coming along, and thank you to Nutrition for letting us have her for 45 minutes to an hour. That's been really good.
Super.
So thank you very much all. I hope you found it really informative. If you are suffering from pain, or you know anybody who is suffering from pain at the moment, either comment below in our Facebook page, or you can comment in our YouTube, or you can instant message us, you can phone us, or just pop on in-store, and we'll be happy to help and advise for everything, because everybody's different. Everyone's got you know, their own particular case. So come on in and we'll try and help you as much as we can. So thank you, Jenny, for popping along.
You're more than welcome. Thoroughly enjoyed myself.
Bye-bye.